Let me tell you something that most people don't understand about human nature, especially when it comes to men and relationships. We don't always realize the value of something while it's constantly available. We notice it when it's gone. When you stop reaching out, when you stop calling, texting, checking in, explaining yourself, something very powerful begins to happen inside his mind. Let me talk to you about something powerful, something simple, and something most people underestimate. Absence creates awareness of value. That's not a theory, that's life. You don't miss what you never had, and you don't fully appreciate what's always available. When you stop reaching out, when you remove your constant presence, something shifts in his mind, and that shift is where awareness begins. You see, when you're always calling, always texting, always checking in, always making sure everything is okay, you become part of the background of his life. Not because you're not important, but because consistency without limits feels guaranteed. And anything that feels guaranteed stops being examined. It stops being protected. It stops being valued the way it should be. That's human nature, not cruelty, just conditioning. When you stop reaching out, the first thing he notices is the silence, and silence is loud. That quiet space forces him to recognize a change in his environment. Suddenly, the phone doesn't light up the way it used to. There's no good morning message, no random check-in, no emotional safety net. And that absence creates discomfort because it breaks the illusion that you will always be there no matter what. That's when awareness starts forming. He begins to realize how much emotional labor you were carrying, how you were the one keeping conversations alive, how you were the one bridging gaps, how you were the one making things smooth and easy. Without you doing that work, everything feels heavier. Conversations feel shorter. Days feel different. And that difference points directly back to you. Now, here's the part most people don't understand. Awareness doesn't always look like immediate action. Sometimes it looks like restlessness. He checks his phone more often. He rereads old messages. He thinks about reaching out, then stops, then thinks again. That internal tug of war is awareness at work. His mind is trying to process the loss of something it didn't know it depended on. Absence also strips away entitlement. When you were always available, he might have felt secure in the idea that no matter what he did, you'd still be there. When you stop reaching out, that security is shaken. He starts realizing that access to you is a privilege, not a guarantee. And when a man understands that something is a privilege, its value immediately increases. Then memory steps in. He starts remembering moments he overlooked. Times when you supported him. Times when you listened. Times when you showed up emotionally even when you didn't have to. Those memories hit harder when they're no longer being replaced by new ones. Absence gives memory room to breathe, and memory has a way of highlighting value. He also becomes aware of how you made him feel about himself. Maybe you encouraged him. Maybe you believed in him when he doubted himself. Maybe you brought peace into his life. When that emotional reinforcement disappears, he feels the gap. And that gap points straight back to your value. Let me tell you something important. This awareness isn't about manipulation. It's not about trying to teach someone a lesson. It's about allowing reality to do what words couldn't. Sometimes you can explain your worth 100 times, and it won't register. But the moment you step back, reality delivers the message clearly. When you stop reaching out, you stop overgiving. You stop pouring into someone who may not be pouring back. And that balance shift forces him to see you differently. Not as someone who will always adjust, but as someone whose presence actually matters. And once awareness sets in, once he truly feels the absence, value becomes undeniable. Because what's missing becomes noticeable. What's noticeable becomes important. And what becomes important can no longer be taken lightly. That's the power of absence. It doesn't beg. It doesn't argue. It simply reveals the truth. Let me tell you something real about silence. Silence is not empty. Silence is not passive. Silence is not weakness. Silence is a mirror. And when you stop reaching out, when you stop explaining, checking, reminding, and holding the emotional rope all by yourself, that silence forces him to look at himself in ways conversation never could. You see, when you're always available, always responsive, always filling the gaps, there is no room for reflection. Noise covers truth. Distraction delays accountability. As long as you're talking, texting, reaching out, he doesn't have to sit with his feelings. He doesn't have to question his effort. He doesn't have to wonder what he's risking. Your presence cushions him from emotional responsibility. But the moment you go quiet, the moment you pull back, the noise disappears. And what replaces it is his own thoughts, his own emotions, his own unanswered questions. Silence removes the escape routes. There's no message to distract him, no reassurance to calm him, no emotional maintenance being done on his behalf. And now he has to feel. At first, that feeling is uncomfortable. Silence creates pressure. It presses on the mind. It asks questions he wasn't ready to answer. Did I take her for granted? Did I show up the way I should have? What if she's done for real? These thoughts don't come from manipulation. They come from reflection. And reflection only happens when distraction is removed. When you stop reaching out, he starts replaying moments. Not just the good ones, but the times you asked for more and he brushed it off. The times you tried to communicate and he minimized it. The times you were patient when he was inconsistent. Silence gives those moments volume. They get louder because there's nothing else to drown them out. Here's the truth most people won't tell you. Men don't always process emotions in real time. Many process them in absence. They feel things after the fact when the environment changes. When you're no longer there to absorb emotional weight, he finally has to carry it himself. And that's when reflection becomes unavoidable. Silence also forces him to confront loss before it's official. He hasn't lost you yet, but he feels the possibility. And that possibility is powerful. It creates a space where emotions surface. Fear, regret, longing, curiosity. All the feelings that were dormant suddenly wake up. Not because you demanded attention, but because your absence made him pay attention. He starts noticing how quiet his world feels without you. How certain moments don't hit the same. How there's no one checking in, no one rooting for him, no one emotionally invested the way you were. That realization doesn't happen during arguments. It happens in silence. Alone. When there's no one else to blame. And let me say this clearly. Silence doesn't force reflection through punishment. It forces reflection through contrast. Life with you versus life without you. Energy with you versus energy without you. Peace with you versus the emptiness that shows up when you're gone. That contrast becomes the teacher. Another thing silence does is remove your emotional influence. When you're constantly present, you soften consequences. You make things easier. You smooth over rough edges. When you stop doing that, he feels the raw version of his choices. And that rawness brings clarity. He can no longer avoid the truth of how his actions affected you. He may not say it out loud, but internally, questions start stacking up. Why didn't I do more? Why did I assume she'd always be there? Why did it take her silence for me to see this? Those questions don't need answers from you. They need honesty from him. And silence creates the environment where honesty can finally show up. This is why silence is powerful. Not because it manipulates emotions, but because it exposes them. It forces reflection without confrontation. It delivers understanding without argument. And when someone is left alone with their thoughts long enough, truth always rises to the surface. So when you stop reaching out, don't think nothing is happening. Something is happening inside his mind, inside his heart, inside the space where reflection lives. Silence is doing the work that words couldn't. Ladies and gentlemen, let me explain something about control, because this is where things get real. When a man feels like he has control in a situation, he feels comfortable. Not powerful in a bad way, just comfortable. Comfortable knowing where he stands. Comfortable knowing you'll respond. Comfortable knowing you're emotionally available when he wants you to be. And comfort unchecked can quietly turn into complacency. When you stop reaching out, that comfort disappears. And the first thing he feels isn't confidence, it's uncertainty. Because control was never about dominance, it was about predictability. He knew your patterns. He knew your timing. He knew your emotional access. And when those patterns break, his sense of stability breaks with them. At first, he tells himself it's nothing. He assumes you're busy. He assumes you'll reach out later. He assumes things will go back to normal. But as time passes, that assumption weakens. And that's when insecurity begins to creep in. Not insecurity about who he is as a man, but insecurity about his place in your life. He starts questioning things he never questioned before. Does she still care? Did I mess something up? Is she pulling away for good? These questions are uncomfortable because they remove certainty, and certainty is what control is built on. When certainty disappears, insecurity fills the gap. Here's the part most people don't understand. Insecurity doesn't always look like panic. Sometimes it looks like silence. Sometimes it looks like distance. Sometimes it looks like pretending not to care. But internally, his mind is active. He's checking his phone more often. He's replaying conversations. He's paying attention to things he used to ignore. When you were always reaching out, he didn't have to wonder if you were slipping away. Now, that possibility feels real, and insecurity grows when something feels at risk. He realizes he no longer knows what you're thinking. He no longer knows how he ranks in your priorities. And not knowing is what shakes him. Loss of control also challenges his ego, not in an aggressive way, but in a reflective way. He's used to being the one who decides the pace, the tone, the distance. When you stop reaching out, you quietly reclaim that power. You're no longer waiting. You're no longer chasing. You're no longer adjusting yourself to maintain connection. And that shift forces him to reevaluate how much influence he actually had. Insecurity also shows up when he considers competition. When you were always there, the idea of someone else entering the picture didn't feel urgent. Now, it does. He starts wondering who else might be receiving your attention. Who else might appreciate your energy? Who else might see what he overlooked? That thought alone can be unsettling. And here's the truth. Insecurity isn't always negative. Sometimes it's the wake-up call. It exposes what matters. When he feels insecure about losing you, it means you mattered more than he admitted. It means your presence wasn't just convenient, it was valuable. And insecurity forces him to confront that reality. He also begins to notice how little control he has over your choices now. You're not asking. You're not explaining. You're not justifying. You're moving with intention. That independence can be intimidating because it means you don't need validation to stand still or move forward. And when someone realizes they are no longer needed to maintain your emotional balance, insecurity naturally follows. This loss of control forces him to look inward. He starts evaluating his effort, his consistency, his priorities. He wonders if he did enough to keep you engaged, if he gave you reasons to stay connected. Those thoughts didn't exist when he felt in control. They exist now because control is gone. And let me say this clearly. You didn't create insecurity by stopping communication. You revealed it. You didn't take power from him. You reclaimed your own. When control shifts, insecurity isn't about you being distant. It's about him realizing that access to you was never guaranteed. Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you something about memory, because memory has a voice. And when presence disappears, that voice gets loud. While you were there, while you were calling, texting, showing up, checking in, doing the little things, your presence did a lot of the talking for you. It filled the space. It made everything feel normal. But the moment you stop reaching out, the moment your presence is no longer constant, memory steps forward and starts speaking in ways that presence never could. When you were there every day, he didn't have to think about you. He could feel you. And feeling doesn't require reflection. Feeling is immediate. It's comfortable. It's familiar. But memory is different. Memory requires pause. Memory requires comparison. And when you're no longer present, his mind starts doing something powerful. It starts replaying. He remembers your voice, not just how it sounded, but how it made him feel. He remembers the way you listened when he talked about his stress, his dreams, his fears. He remembers the encouragement you gave him, the patience you showed him, the way you stood by him, even when he wasn't at his best. These memories don't rush in all at once. They show up quietly, then they linger. At night, when there's no distraction, memory gets louder. During moments he used to share with you, memory shows up again. A song plays. A place reminds him of you. A situation happens and instinctively he thinks of telling you, then realizes you're not there to receive it anymore. That realization hits harder than any argument ever could. You see, presence can be taken for granted, but memory can't. Memory forces acknowledgement. It says, this mattered. It highlights emotional details he may have overlooked while you were still accessible. The small things become big things. The laughs, the inside jokes, the way you understood him without him having to explain himself. All of that becomes clearer in your absence. Memory also has a way of editing reality. It doesn't focus on every flaw or every disagreement. It focuses on impact, on how you added value to his life, on how you made things feel easier, warmer, more stable. And when memory becomes louder, he starts realizing that your presence wasn't just company, it was contribution. He begins to recognize the emotional consistency you brought. How you showed up even when you didn't have to. How you cared even when it wasn't convenient. And without you actively giving that energy anymore, the contrast becomes undeniable. Memory draws a line between what life felt like with you and what it feels like now. This is where regret can start to surface. Not always dramatic regret, but quiet regret. The kind that sits in the back of the mind. The kind that asks, why didn't I appreciate this more? Why did I assume she'd always be there? Those questions come from memory, not presence. Because presence allowed him to postpone appreciation. Memory does not. Memory also reminds him of how you made him feel about himself. Stronger, supported, valued, believed in. When those feelings aren't being reinforced anymore, he notices their absence. And that absence points directly back to you. Not because you're gone, but because what you gave is gone. Another thing memory does is strip away ego. While you were present, ego could say, she'll be here. Memory doesn't give ego that comfort. Memory says she was here and now she's not. And that shift from present to past carries weight. It makes things feel fragile. It makes him realize that what he had is no longer guaranteed. He may find himself idealizing moments he once overlooked. A simple conversation, a shared silence, a routine interaction. Things that felt ordinary now feel meaningful. That's the power of memory. It reframes what once felt normal into something valuable. And here's the truth. Memory doesn't beg. It doesn't argue. It doesn't explain. It just reminds. It plays scenes in his mind without asking permission. It shows him what your presence meant by showing him what life feels like without it. That's why memory becomes louder than presence ever was. Let's talk about fear, because fear has a way of waking people up when comfort puts them to sleep. When you stop reaching out, when you stop being emotionally available on demand, something shifts deep inside him. The idea that he might actually lose you becomes real, and that reality introduces fear. Not loud fear, not dramatic fear, but quiet, unsettling fear that sits in the chest and won't go away. While you were always there, the possibility of losing you felt distant. It felt theoretical. He knew you cared. He knew you were invested. He assumed your presence was stable, and assumptions create safety. But the moment you pull back, that safety is questioned. Suddenly, he's no longer sure, and uncertainty is where fear is born. He starts to realize that your attention is no longer guaranteed, that your energy is no longer automatically his, that you might be choosing yourself instead of waiting. And that realization brings a sharp awareness. Fear doesn't come from losing something you don't value. It comes from realizing you might lose something that mattered more than you admitted. This is when his thoughts begin to wander. He wonders where your focus is now, who you're talking to, how you're spending your time, and more importantly, whether someone else might be appreciating what he overlooked. The fear of replacement is powerful because it forces him to imagine a future where he is no longer central in your life. And let me tell you something important. Fear of replacement isn't just jealousy. It's recognition. It's him finally seeing that you are desirable, valuable, and capable of being chosen by someone else. While you were always present, he didn't have to confront that truth. Your absence forces him to. This fear often awakens desire. Not just physical desire, but emotional desire. The desire to reconnect. The desire to hear your voice. The desire to feel that familiarity again. When fear shows up, desire follows closely behind because desire is the mind's attempt to reclaim what feels at risk. He begins to romanticize you. He thinks about what made you special, what made you different, what made you feel like home. The things he once saw as normal now feel rare. The way you cared, the way you understood him, the way you showed patience. Fear sharpens focus, and his focus turns toward you. He may start imagining scenarios where he reaches out and you don't respond the same way. That thought alone is unsettling. It challenges his ego. It challenges his sense of importance. And when a man feels his importance slipping, desire intensifies. Because desire is often rooted in wanting to feel chosen. Fear also strips away excuses. He can no longer tell himself that things are fine. He can no longer assume time is unlimited. The clock feels like it's ticking. And when time feels limited, priorities change. Effort becomes urgent. Appreciation becomes clearer. What once felt optional now feels necessary. This is where emotional awakening happens. Not because you demanded it, but because fear forced it. Fear asks hard questions. What if I lose her? What if I waited too long? What if she realizes she deserves more? These questions don't come from pressure. They come from possibility, the possibility of regret. And fear has a way of revealing truth. If losing you didn't matter, fear wouldn't exist. The presence of fear confirms significance. It confirms that your absence is weight, that your silence carries meaning, that your decision to stop reaching out wasn't invisible, it was impactful. He may try to suppress this fear. He may act indifferent. He may distract himself. But fear doesn't disappear easily. It waits. It resurfaces in quiet moments, late at night, early in the morning, during moments when he expects to hear from you and doesn't. And in those moments, desire grows stronger, because desire feeds on what feels just out of reach. When you were always accessible, desire could relax. Now, with distance in place, desire wakes up. It becomes alert. It becomes focused. It becomes intentional. Let me finish this by talking about respect, because respect is the final emotion that shows up when everything else is settled. When you stop reaching out, when you stop chasing, when you stop overextending yourself just to keep a connection alive, something changes in how he sees you. And that change is deeper than attraction, deeper than fear, deeper than desire. It's respect. You see, chasing sends one message, even when you don't mean it to. It says, I'll keep adjusting myself to stay connected. It says, I'll keep giving even if I'm not receiving. And over time, that creates an imbalance. Not because you're wrong for caring, but because effort without boundaries teaches people how little effort is required to keep you. When you stop reaching out, that lesson ends. You stop negotiating your worth. You stop proving your value. You stop explaining why you deserve consistency. And that shift is powerful because it communicates something words never could. It says, I respect myself enough to step back. That self-respect doesn't go unnoticed. Even if he doesn't admit it out loud, he feels it. He notices that you're no longer waiting. You're no longer chasing responses. You're no longer bending yourself into emotional shapes just to fit his comfort. And when someone sees that you can walk away from imbalance, they begin to see you differently. Respect grows when he realizes you are not dependent on his attention to feel whole. Your silence shows independence. It shows emotional maturity. It shows that you have a life, priorities, and self-worth beyond him. And that realization shifts the dynamic completely. He starts to understand that access to you is not automatic, that your time is valuable, that your energy is intentional. And once a man understands that your presence is a choice, not a guarantee, respect naturally follows. Because people respect what they have to earn. Stopping the chase also removes desperation from the equation. And let me be clear, choosing yourself is not desperation, but chasing can sometimes be interpreted that way. When you stop reaching out, you remove any question about your confidence. You stand firm, you move with calm, you let your actions speak. Respect also comes from mystery. When you're always explaining yourself, always updating, always reaching out, there's nothing left to wonder about. When you step back, space is created. And space invites curiosity. Curiosity leads to thought. Thought leads to appreciation. And appreciation is rooted in respect. He may start asking himself different questions now. Not why is she chasing me, but why did I let someone like her pull away? That shift in questioning is crucial. It places value back where it belongs, on you. Respect grows further when he realizes you didn't leave in anger or chaos. You left in calm. You didn't beg. You didn't threaten. You didn't dramatize. You simply stopped reaching. That kind of quiet confidence leaves a lasting impression. It shows strength. It shows boundaries. It shows self-control. And here's the truth. Respect isn't about fear of losing you alone. It's about admiration for how you handled yourself. It's about recognizing that you didn't abandon your dignity just to stay connected. You chose peace over pressure, balance over chasing, self-worth over validation. He may even begin to reflect on his own effort, on whether he showed up enough, on whether he matched your energy, on whether he assumed too much. And those reflections often come with a newfound respect for what you brought to the table and how graceful you stepped away when it wasn't being honored. Respect also changes how he approaches you if he does reach out again. The tone is different. The effort is clearer. The intention is stronger because now he understands that you are not someone to be taken lightly. You are someone who can walk away and still stand tall. And even if he never reaches out again, respect still remains because you didn't lose yourself trying to hold on to someone who wasn't meeting you halfway. You didn't sacrifice your worth for attention. You honored yourself. And that is the highest form of respect there is.